Okay, I'm going to try to explain this book cover that was put up. Let me see who I need to thank. Braveheart, thank you. Yeah, this woman, whoever she is, claims to be some big shot with BAE. She suggested that our comments, which were made in 2010, by the way, 2010, that's 8 years ago, she says they were reprehensible and something else. And she also gave us a compliment. She said that we've inspired a whole generation of conspiracy people to believe in this. And then she asked a question exposing her ignorance. There's David. Let me just go get him. David, are you there?
I am.
Okay, well, Denise will adjust your volume while I ask you a question. Are you aware of this woman from BAE exposing her ignorance today?
Yes, I replied to you. I think she's a useful idiot.
Well, I think you're being kind, and being kind to her and unkind to normal useful idiots. But are you in the chat room right now?
Yes.
Do you see the, go down to the bottom and then scroll up until you see a picture of a F4, and you won't have to scroll up. It's the second image from the bottom.
All right.
And it looks like the cover to a book.
Yeah, got it.
And it says, How My Phantom Helped BAE Privatize War for Corporate Profits.
Yes.
Okay, well, it wouldn't strike many people, but in that picture of that aircraft, right at the bottom of the leading edge of its tail, it's got some white letters, which are a civilian registration number. And the number, even though it's hard to read unless you blow it up, it's November 424FS. And there's another telltale piece of evidence that most people wouldn't notice unless they have a background on this F4 type aircraft. But if you look between the forward canopy that's raised and the forward windscreen, you can see a horizontal pipe. And that's a Navy type air refueling probe. And yet it's an Air Force aircraft which has its own internal refueling receptacle. And so when somebody sent me this picture about, it was probably 10 years ago I got this picture, and it came from somebody whose name I'm not going to mention, but you know who he is, and he was a disinformation agent, perhaps, doesn't matter. But when I got this picture the first time, the person who sent it asked me if I saw anything odd about this airplane I used to fly. But the beauty of it is, this woman from BAE, who I think she protested too strongly for her opening comment, she apparently didn't know about me, not that I'm important, but she had the name Ed Long, and she didn't have my name. And so I think if she doesn't, say something kind, why don't I just go ahead and write a book called How My Phantom Helped BAE Privatize War for Corporate Profits? Because that airplane, right there on the cover of the book cover of the book that doesn't exist, by the way, but it could, she made some pretty strong statements, and she doesn't know her rear end from third base, because that airplane you're looking at was leased by BAE and Tracor, Tracor, which is a subcorporation of BAE, and maybe somebody like Gobsmack over in the United Kingdom, or somebody else like David Veitch in the United Kingdom, maybe they would have some way of figuring out the relationship between Tracor and BAE. But the woman who I would say opened up pretty strong, considering she doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, by the way, before you try to figure out what to do, there's already 4 people involved in how we're going to respond to this. And, you can be number 5 if you wish, but Agent Webster, who is our director of propaganda, and Agent Hacksaw, who makes up our wonderful DSTMs, Don't Shoot the Messenger images, myself and Craig and Denise are all thinking about how to do this. But we're going to wait until tomorrow, and then tomorrow we may have a letter to BAE, because they've really put their foot in their mouth. they are claiming that we don't know what we're talking about, and the Boeing uninterruptible autopilots do not exist, which puts them at loggerheads with Boeing, because Boeing admitted in London on the 3rd of March of 2007 that not only does the BUAP exist, but they said, and by 2010 it will be in every airliner in the world. So I think I think BAE probably has a woman engineer that doesn't really know what she's talking about. Your comments, Lordship?
Well, I think it's fascinating that, because these people don't have an A-team and they're not communicating amongst themselves very well, they've opened up an area of ignorance, which is, I'm quite sure, yet to be proven, that woman would not be aware that the Soames brothers have been building a Churchillian toy box, if you will, where uninterruptible autopilot technology is published internally but not available to the general public and the BAE Corporation. So she very probably may not know of this stuff. Over to you.
I think she should know of it if she's going to open her mouth. If she's going to, as a BAE representative who presents herself as a senior engineer, if she thinks that her opinion is informed and matters, she probably should research the subject matter before she opens her yap.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But coming back to this idea that patents have been kept secret from the general public, that dates back at least to World War II, Field.
Okay.
And Churchill and Victor Rothschild would have understood how important it was that technologies that might be useful to the enemy, that required a patent to protect the inventor, if you will, needed to go to a place where the enemy couldn't read them. And it turns out that there was one place physically, they called it, I think, the Furs, which was the place called for Churchill's toy box, Toyshop rather, where they really invented some amazing things. But over in Chicago, they had the equivalent, which was at Northern Trust, which is a shareholder in Serco, and that was the alien property custodian going back to World War I. So this idea of taking out patents, and I think they're called submarine patents, that is to say, the general public and the industry doesn't know about it, but what they can do is they can have a submarine that is just waiting there. When a company like Sony spends billions of dollars researching and developing a commercial videotape system, then out jumps the patent vault owner or custodian and says, you owe me so many millions of dollars, which really pisses off people who've spent a great deal of money in investing in a patent that had already been invented. Over to you.
Okay, I'm going down to see if Craig's here today. Yes, he is. We have quite a crowd. I don't know what the limit of our chat room is. I think 100, but we've got to be close to that. Anyway, Jack Mack just put up something about this aircraft in question. Then I'm going to change subjects to the Novichok. But Jack Mack just put up the registration. Actually, it's a deregistration of the F-4. And I think that, yeah, there we go. United States Air Force owns it, but it was on the flight line, 1434 flight line, building 58B at Mojave, California. And I think this woman from BAE is going to turn out to be a real embarrassment to BAE. By the way, David, if I asked you to guess, you have a 50-50 chance of being right here. If I asked you to guess if Michael Chertoff was a director of BAE, how would you guess?
Yes.
Yeah, you'd guess correctly. He's it's not like a real big director, but he's an associate director. So what you have is you got Michael Chertoff, who made billions on 9/11 on both sides of the wager. And he also tried to make billions at the Las Vegas false flag on October 1st, which is a Sunday, as I recall. Because off the top of my head, my birthday is October 2nd, and I had planned to fly over here to spend my birthday with Denise. But at the last minute, I had two reasons not to fly. One is perhaps somebody put a bug in my ear that something was going to happen in Henderson, Reno, or Las Vegas, Nevada. And another thing, I had a totally bloody, do you remember if it was my right eye, Denise, or my left eye? I'm trying to remember. Left? Yeah, I think. Yeah. I walked into one of my favorite businesses in Plum City, and there's only about 4 businesses in Plum City, so it wouldn't take people too long to guess. And somebody said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "Nothing. Why do you say that?" And they said, "Well, your left eye is completely red." And I said, "You mean bloodshot or completely red?" They said, "Completely red." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." So I went and looked in a mirror, and they were right. And what had happened was, apparently the previous evening, I must have sneezed while I was sleeping and bust a capillary or two in my left eye. But because I had, a healing left eye, in fact, I think somebody told me eyes heal very quickly. I can't remember. Somebody in the chat room will know if that's right, and they'll offer their opinion. Actually, they'll offer the truth, because I'm sure they wouldn't offer an opinion. But so anyway, I ended up not going to England until a week or so later after my eye fixed itself. But it was fortuitous, because that was the day of the Las Vegas false flag, where Chertoff and J.M. Cohen intended to make a lot of money by causing people to believe that Stephen Paddock, who was trying to cover up his association with Kristine Marcy and Hillary Clinton as it pertains to ranches for pedophiles, both in the Philippines and in Nevada. Anyway, somebody decided he needed to go away, so they shot him, and then they threw his rear end where they wanted him to be found. Sort of like Vince Foster. He was shot in one place and they put him somewhere else. But I would say at this late juncture that the Bush, Clinton, Obama, and Kristine Marcy crime family is not fooling too many people anymore, and their signature is so recognizable. If they sneeze, we know they did it. What do you think about that, David?
Yeah, I think that's a very important word, Field, signature, because the research at the moment is being very productive when there's a crime scene to identify the possible use of various patented devices, because, as you'll see, every patent has a very precise description of how it operates, and then when it's used or misused at a crime scene, it's indicative of the processes and the ingredients captured in the patent. So I've just popped in a patent image or a schematic of an image, and I just won't tell you. I think you already know who was the original assignee of this patent, and ultimately it's a company, but behind that is a particular individual. Can you see that schematic, Field, and tell me on the right what that represents? What building is represented by that schematic on the right? Over to you.
I wish I knew, but is it the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office?
No, it's the Bank of England.
Oh, let me give you a second guess. Okay, you ready? Have you got the first errant guess cleanly out of your mind?
Yeah, I realized that was a limited hangout from you.
Yes, it was. No, obviously this black and white building is the Bank of England.
Right, and you see what is written? It's a bit, maybe it blows up on my, yes it does. Can you see what is placed, the 2 words underneath that schematic, which shows the Bank of England on the right?
Yeah, it says requesting organization.
And then over on the left is a couple of clouds, and of course what they don't know is we inhabit. In fact, to a certain extent, I think Abel Danger controls the cloud, but we'll move on. So there's a question that is popping out of the requesting organization. And what is that question, Field? It's marked 140.
Uh-oh, let me get back in there. Where is the patent?
No, where is, and it's question mark. So the Bank of England wants to know where someone is, right?
Okay.
Down below, it's got customer registration.
Yep.
To the left of that is another cloud where they have created the patentee or the assignee or the inventor, whatever you like to call it. They've dreamt up a patented device that offers or supports location as a service.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Now let's say they, that is the people associated with the Bank of England, decide that you're a bit of a problem. I mean, and I know that you are a bit of a problem because I've known you for quite a while, right?
Yeah, you've known me since Wednesday, the 6th of December of 2006.
And I knew when I was talking with you that you were going to be a problem. And what I decided is I'd rather you were a problem for someone else rather than a problem for me.
Yes, and do you remember the 3 questions you asked me?
Yes, I do. You can relay them to the audience.
No, that's okay. They've heard them before, and they don't want to see you be ashamed of yourself, and neither do I.
Right. So location as a service was evidently, and it's the initials for that, LKL. That's number 110 on the schematic. This is maybe the most important schematic of a pattern in our collective works over the years, Field, because it leads straight to the perpetrators of 911.
Okay.
So location as a service. Remember what the second S is in our little 6S array? Over to you.
Well, give me 6 guesses and I'll get it.
Well, the first one is script, as you know.
Well, then, is it spot?
Yeah.
Good.
So what these
Wait a
guys
minute.
are doing...
Hang on
Go
just a
ahead,
minute. Let me guess. Ask me again. Let me be more affirmative so I sound like I'm knowledgeable.
What's the second S in our 6 array S's?
Spot.
Correct. What's the next one?
Well, snuff is number 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then spoil is in there.
Yeah, but don't we need a camera to record the money
Shoot.
shot?
Shoot.
You got it. Spot, script, spot, shoot, snuff, spin, and spoil. If you look at the schematic, you know what it reminds me of, Field? It reminds me of the Federal Bridge Certification Authority.
Yep.
Which Brucey Baby put together with your sister.
Okay, for our new people, Brucey Baby is Bruce McConnell, no relation to me, and his father was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and then the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was a traitor to America, and he was a 4-star general, but during World War II, while other red-blooded Americans like my dad are getting shot down and put in POW camp, Brucey Baby's dad, whose name oh, wait a minute, it'll come to me. He was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Somebody want to look it up? It could have been Robert McConnell. I can't remember. Anyway, he was a traitor, and during World War II, he cruised up and down the East Coast in a bomber looking for submarines. Meanwhile, hundreds and thousands of Army Air Force personnel were being blown out of the sky or put in German or Japanese POW camps, while Brucey Baby's traitor dad, just cruised up and down the East Coast, where you can't really be shot by a German or a Jap because it's just the U.S. that's up there. So anyway, I don't have much respect for 4-star generals or 4-star admirals that are traitors. I think most people are aware of that by now. Over to you, David.
Okay, so what the schematic does, it maps onto the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, and its use, it really doesn't matter when the application was filed, because I think there were submarine patents filed, but not published, so that the parties behind this, which let's say was the Bank of England and various other bodies associated with the Crown, would have been able to track patsies and crisis actors and witnesses and victims through a crime scene before the crime scene occurred, and have a script all ready to go where the various people that needed to speak out were given an opportunity or told what to say, and the people that were not supposed to speak out were warned of what might happen to them if they did. So moving over from location as a service, we have 130, which again is a cloud. Here is exclamation mark. So I'm just hypothesizing, Phil. You got Field McConnell on 911. Where were you exactly?
Well, I was driving a school bus, and I heard, while I was driving, I heard some interesting news developing, and I got to the back of the school, and I set my parking brake and turned my flashers on and opened the front door, and the little kids got off my school bus, and then I heard them say that a second light aircraft had hit the second tower, and then by that time the 6 or 8 school buses all had dropped our children off, and they were safely away from the buses. So we, all of us, took our buses and left the school and went back to where the buses spent the day between bus routes. Now this is when I was supposed to be flying an Airbus for Northwest Airlines, But I had a neighbor who needed a bus driver for a week or two, so I helped him out. And so I was safe and sound in Glyndon, Glyndon, Minnesota, driving a school bus. And by the time I got to the dairy farm, which was half-mile away, and parked my bus and went inside, the family, and I'm going to demonstrate, not that it matters, history will forget these people too, just like it will forget you and I, but the family of four that I went in to observe the attack of 9/11, it was Lloyd and Janine Setter, Seter, and their two sons, Trent and Craig, Craig. And I sat there with these, so there were five of us watching the TV, and we were watching the drone of United 175 hit the building over and over in a slight left-hand turn, descending, left-hand bank, left-hand turn, nose down. Because of the airspeed, it was going about 340. The speed limit's 250, by the way. That's one of the reasons on 9/11 I knew we were being lied to, is because most airline pilots are pretty timid about breaking the speed limit, and then there's exceptions, like someone you know, David. But most airline pilots, they're not going to go more than 250 because they're afraid of losing their job, their prestige, and their phony baloney bragging rights. But anyway, I sat there and I mentioned to the Setter family of four, I said that aircraft is not being flown by a human. And I knew that because of the lack of check turns and the speed. And if it's not being flown by a human, then it's neither being flown by the crew of United, which of course there was no crew, it was a drone, and it wasn't being flown by the hijackers, because the hijackers and the crew and the real United 175 had been flown out into Whiskey 386 Alpha airspace and destroyed with Smacksonic. Is that roughly how you recall it?
Yeah, absolutely, totally right.
Okay, good.
So what I'm going to be doing with this schematic is tracking, figuratively or in my mind, two individuals, you, Field McConnell,
yep,
and Captain Chick Burlingham,
okay,
on the morning of 9/11. And what this schematic describes essentially is a system where you and Chick Burlingham can be tracked and spotted,
yep,
in the vicinity of, or perhaps related to, the events described on 9/11 as the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. My general statement, Field, is that I don't think this required a lot of planning, because with a system like this in place, they could have decided at the very last minute who they wanted to be seen to be flying a plane into the Pentagon, even if he didn't actually go into the Pentagon, because what they can do with this system is inject the perception into the public's mind that Captain Chick Burlingham did fly the plane that hit the Pentagon, right?
Yes, yeah, everybody believes that except me and you and people at Abel Danger.
Right. Now, top left, of course, are the various devices, and of course we have to go back to 2001 to determine in what configuration these devices were available to the perpetrators of the crimes of 9/11. So I don't know what ATMs, well, I can guess, I think ATMs haven't changed very much. That's what's that, an automatic teller machine that's in the bank. You go there and you pop your card in, you get money, right?
Yep.
POS, I think that's a personal operating system or something, like a BlackBerry.
Oh, okay.
Further around, we have the web. Well, the web certainly existed in 2001. We have the mobile web, so I guess there are a number of devices. I believe, actually, America Online had a mobile web device, and America Online, AOL, that was where one of our favorite characters became the first internet billionaire. Do you remember who he is? Over to you.
I wasn't listening, I'm not being rude, but let me go back. I'm still trying to find your image, so I'll stop looking for your image and go ahead and ask me the question and watch how quickly I answer it.
Okay, there's a key character that was the director of America Online on 9/11. He's believed to have become the first internet billionaire because of his relationship with America Online. Over to you.
Yeah, his name's Alexander Haig.
Yes. And he was interviewed, I think it was on Fox News, on the morning of 9/11, and at 9 o'clock he was asked who he thought was behind it. The camera was pointing at the north face of the North Tower, had a nice convincing gash in it. And he said, well, I don't want to speculate, but we know where to look. It's the Palestinian and bin Laden groups. And I know I'm taken to task frequently because bin Laden group, small g, doesn't indicate the bin Laden group, which is the name of the organization, started by the father and run by some of the children, including Osama bin Laden. But needless to say that I think there's a very clear demonstration that General Alexander Haig had studied a script in advance of this attack, and he was told to say, well, we know where to look. It's either the bin Laden groups or the Palestinians. So there, he's manipulating the perceptions. Now, the question is about this guy. Was he doing it because there was a metaphorical gun to his head? Had he done something when he was 7th Supreme Allied Commander in Europe? Well, I think he was working in Brussels. And back in Brussels, we know that there was a pedophile ring that extended all the way to the Belgian royal family. So it's highly likely, given the techniques used by British intelligence, that General Alexander Haig had been entrapped in a pedophile network and was being blackmailed. Does that seem reasonable? Over to you.
Yeah, what was that guy's name? Dutroux?
Yeah, Dutroux, D-U-T-R-U-X. And he specialized in pimping little children and providing children for aristocrats and bankers to chase with dogs through the woods where they could be torn to pieces by the dogs. And of course the Belgians are up in arms about it, but because they couldn't see behind the curtain, well, we're going to change all that, right, Phil?
Well, I think so. I think we're changing it right now. I mean, we've already got British aerospace looking like blithering idiots. And I wonder how the CEO or the senior people, and this is a serious question, I wonder when this stuff is on their plate tomorrow, how the people leading BAE are going to appreciate that woman engaging Abel danger where she's guaranteed to lose because she doesn't know her rear end from third base.
Well, they're going to be pretty cross, but they got real problems because as we dig deep down into this patent vault, we'll find a whole bunch of patents operated or assigned to by British Aerospace, some of which, as we dig deeper, we'll discover that they weren't published. Now, I believe that British Aerospace is heavily involved in FADEC. Is that correct? Over to you.
I don't know the answer. I would say yes, and I will tell you something that I do know. In 1994 at Malkintyre, I hope I got that right. If not, Agent Bugs or Gobanks or Denise will correct me. But in 1994, a Royal Military Chinook was bringing back an intelligence team from Northern Ireland who knew too much about what was really going on, and so the people back at the Ministry of Defense, if that's what it's called, they needed to get rid of these well-informed intelligence people, so they drove them into sheer rock, and they can do that with a Boeing. Now, first of all, the Chinook is a Boeing aircraft. It happens to be a rotary wing aircraft, which means helicopter, but a Chinook has two main rotors. In other words, it doesn't have one great big rotor and then a little tail rotor. It's got two main rotors, and it's built by Boeing, and if it had an autopilot in 94, it would have been susceptible to having the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot hidden, just like, according to what I would testify in a court tomorrow if I was called, I would say every Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, Bombardier, and Sukhoi jet out there has three autopilots, one for the captain, one for the co-pilot, and one that's hidden, that neither the captain nor the co-pilot know about, and it's on Ames Rack, that's spelled A-I-M-S, Ames Rack C on the Boeing 777s. And do you know, and I don't think you do know, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, but a lot of the people in our chat room, let me see if Braveheart's here right now, because Braveheart, if he's here, and yes, he's here, Braveheart would know what a KC-46 is. It's a brand new tanker being built by Boeing, and it's based on the 767 airframe, and it has the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot in it already, and I know that 100% for certain, but I don't think the Air Force knows it. And the gentleman that I just referred to, Braveheart, unless I've got my characters misaligned, he was an instructor flight engineer on the C-5 Galaxy aircraft, and I think as an instructor flight engineer on a wide-body 4-engine Lockheed Galaxy, he would be required to know every single system on the entire airplane. And so if he and I were to meet on the street and we started talking and we didn't know each other, and I said something about the brand new Boeing tanker, the KC-46 Pegasus, having an uninterruptible autopilot that the Air Force didn't know about, I think he'd tell me I was out to lunch. In fact, a guy that worked for Boeing once told me that right here in the chat room about 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, I can tell you what year it was. It was 2014, because I was commenting on Malaysia 370, and I said that Malaysia 370 had a Boeing uninterruptible autopilot, and this person who responded had quite a good background involving naval, as in U.S. Navy aviation, an airline history. He worked at an aircraft manufacturer that made airliners, and he's worked for a number of airlines since. So the very well-informed guy told me I didn't know what I was talking about, and a lot of people in the chat room right now were privy to this conversation. I know Denise was, and she's 4 feet from me right now. When he told me basically that I was completely wrong, I said, would you like to see a 66-page document that tracks the history of the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot from 1953 to 2013? And he said, yes, he would. And I said, well, I'll post it in the chat room. So with that in mind, David, let me turn it over to you. And first of all, I'm going to ask if anybody in the chat room already has the 66-page document. And my guess is if anybody has it, oh, there's the picture of the tanker right there from Braveheart, and it's refueling a pair of F-15s. That 2-engine gray airplane with a air refueling probe sticking down towards the nose of the closest F-15. That's a KC-46A Pegasus, and whether Boeing knows it or not, they've got a uninterruptible autopilot. Now, somebody who's sane and lucid might say, well, how can they possibly not know it's there? It's real easy, because it's a General Electric part, and General Electric is the source of the problem, not Boeing. David, over to you.
Right, Field, and I've just popped in the chat room the description of an intervention flight management system which was patented by Boeing. At least the original assignee was Boeing, and the priority date is 1986, 0815, 15th of August in 1986, and it was granted, the patent was granted US 4811230A in 1989, in fact on the 7th of March. The first few words, or in the abstract, are an intervention flight management system that allows a pilot to intervene in the operation of a pre-programmed flight management computer and change the speed and or flight path of an airplane in response to air traffic control, ATC instructions, is disclosed. So you're right. I mean, this stuff is at least 50 years old, but what intrigues me is some of these companies are publishing patents, but they're burying, I think, some elements of the patent application in a patent vault, either going back to World War II at the Firs in the United Kingdom, where Churchill's Toyshop was developing some really interesting ways of blowing people up, and more topically, at the Alien Property Custodian offices in Chicago of Northern Trust, which is a global custodian and a shareholder in Serco, who would no doubt have sent a representative to listen to Chris Hyman on the 47th floor of the North Tower, where at that time, or approximately at that time, General Alexander Haig was watching from some control room somewhere. I think it's just possible in the control room of Boeing Phantom Works at the headquarters in Chicago. And actually, this comes back to the point we're going to need sooner or later to find out, and that's an answer to this patent which serves the Bank of England, exactly where some of these characters were. Like, I want to know where your sister was on the morning of 9/11. Do you have any idea where she might have been, Field? Over to you.
Oh, I'd say she probably was in the company of Hillary Clinton or some other lesbian. But I've gone on record in writing and saying that Hillary Clinton and my sister expected to go to Mount Washington at 11:11 on the morning of 9/11. Can you refresh my memory as to what time the flying vehicle impacted the Pentagon on that morning? Do you recall off the top of your head?
Yes, 9:37:18 Eastern Time.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So an hour and a half later, they would have been on the train to Mount Washington. Now, David, I know that this kind of stuff doesn't interest you, but on January 31st of this year, which was the day after the State of the Union message that Donald Trump delivered, much to the chagrin of the deep state, the Democrats, and people like Chuck the Schmuck Schumer and Nancy Face-Drop Pelosi. But do you remember that a train got derailed a little bit? It didn't actually get derailed. It ran into a truck. Do you recall that, David?
What date was that?
It was the day after the State of the Union. It was on January 31st. An Amtrak train had an accident with a truck on its way to Mount Washington.
Yes, I do remember.
Well, fortunately for us, the CEO of Amtrak had just taken his job on the 1st of January of 2018. Are you with me so far?
Right.
The CEO of Amtrak that took over on January 1st of 2018, his name is Richard, I think his middle initial is E, Anderson, and he was formerly, in order, going back on his work history, before Amtrak he was the CEO of Delta. Before Delta he was the CEO of United Healthcare in Minneapolis. Before United Healthcare he was the CEO of Northwest Airlines, where I worked, and he and I have actually dealt one-on-one on 2 or 3 occasions, and I think if he had my name written down in front of him on a piece of paper on his desk and he concentrated, he could recall what we communicated about. But he would have been the CEO of Northwest Airlines when I started reporting certain things about Boeing aircraft. But somebody in the chat room, in fact, I don't like to say somebody if I know who they are, Gobsmack or Gobanks in the chat room said that there was autopilots in aircraft going back to World War II. Actually, before that even, in 1937, the Germans had a Henkel's bomber. I hope somebody from Europe will find that, or maybe Braveheart. He likes airplanes. But I don't know if the Henkel's bomber was a 111 or what. But it was a 2-engine Henkel's bomber, and it had a fighter attached to the top of the bomber. And the bomber could fly the fighter out to a launch point and then launch the fighter, and the fighter was autonomous, meaning that it was flown by an autopilot, and the controls for the autopilot, I believe, were in the Henkel's bomber. Okay, so let's go from the Germans being first to Americans being second. In 1943, Americans had QB-17s flying around. The name of the operation was Aphrodite. I can't spell it, but it might be APHRODITE. But under the Operation Aphrodite, the BQ-17s were not very good. So they started using consolidated liberators, which were called B-24s when my dad flew them. But the drone version of a B-24 was called a QB-8. And I always get this date goofed up, but somebody can correct me. I believe it was on the 20th of August of 1944, Joe Kennedy Jr. was murdered. I didn't say died. I didn't say killed. He was murdered in a BQ-8. And he and his co-pilot were just at the point where they were going to bail out. The BQ-8 was loaded with 21,600 pounds of Torpax, and it was destined for the buzz bomb base in France. And their protocol was to count to 3, and that was to have the guy with the Bell and Honeywell camera, Bell and Howell, excuse me. The reason I said Honeywell is the people that developed the BUAP. The Bell and Howell camera was in the hands of FDR's son, Elliott Roosevelt, in a RAF Mosquito, and he was told when they count to 3 to make sure the camera's on so he can take pictures of the 2 pilots, and that would be Navy Lieutenant Joe Kennedy Jr. and the other guy who is a wannabe. They were supposed to bail out on the count of 3, and it went something like this. It was supposed to go 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potatoes, photograph. But what happened on that morning, and I think it was the 20th of August of 1944, was there was 1 potato, 2 potato, boom. And what I'm saying here, and I know that we're about 74 years down the track, but there's a whole lot of murders that have never been solved, including Colonel Sabo, including Arrow Air 1285, which happened on the 20th of December of 1985, I think. And also Joe Kennedy Jr. He didn't die in an accident. The people in the RAF Mosquito, and one of the people, if there were 2, I believe there were 2 because I don't think Elliott Roosevelt would have been trusted with a British aircraft. But anyway, instead of waiting for the 3rd potato and seeing the guys come out of the airplane before he took the picture, he detonated 21,600 pounds of high explosive, not only killing Joe Kennedy Jr., who would have been just like George S. Patton. Joe Kennedy would have been a Democratic nominee candidate and nominee in 1948, and George S. Patton would have been the Republican. And of course, the deep state, it didn't just start with my sister and Hillary. We had cowards permeating the United States government going back to 1776. Would you argue that with me in a court with the gold fringe flag removed?
No, I wouldn't argue, and I would argue that that's coincident with the formation of the 2 fraternities, Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi, where Phi Beta Kappa represents, or has represented, the interests of 17 presidents, 38 Supreme Court judges, and over 100 Nobel Prize winners, and one of those, of course, is Bill Clinton, another is George Bush Sr., and the other fraternity contemporaneous with that is Kappa Beta Phi, which represents presumably the interests of Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary. He was 25 years with N.M. Rothschild and Sons and restructured Trump's debts for him when Trump owed apparently, or the family owed $4 billion, and it should have been sent into bankruptcy, but obviously the creditors knew they'd get pennies in the dollar if they sent him into bankruptcy. So presumably Wilbur Ross said, well, why don't we make him president of the United States, and then you can get your money back that way. As you know, Field, my prayer and hope is that Trump will be able to come out from underneath that swamp and drain it, and with a little help from his friends, which includes, I think, you and me, we can turn the show around. But I'm continuing with the schematic. Is that all right?
Oh, certainly. Do whatever you want. I'm just sitting here talking to Denise.
Okay, so just a reminder, on the right-hand side is a building which is the Bank of England. I think the schematic for a patent will actually map onto the Federal Bridge Certification Authority, which was activated on 9/11 to make it appear as though Osama bin Laden had attacked the United States, when in fact it was a domestic attack, which is why I think your second book, what was it, title, Field?
Well, let me think. Foul BVR, and by the way, BVR is a fighter pilot term for beyond visual range, and you really can't be 100% sure what you're shooting if you can't see it with your own eyeballs, and so that's what a BVR shot is. That's where you're relying on the ground control intercept controllers or the AWACS controllers to absolutely know what you're about ready to kill. Otherwise, since you can't see it, you could be killing a friendly person or an innocent airliner. Back to somewhere in the 80s, an Airbus was shot down by the USS Vincennes because whoever pulled the trigger on the surface-to-air intercept missile wasn't 100% sure of what they were shooting at. And that brings us to TWA 800, where a U.S. guided missile frigate was firing on a Firebee drone, and in the same airspace where the Firebee drone was, TWA 800 was vectored in, just like MH17 was vectored north to Donetsk. And when these rat bastards want to kill people and blame it on the military, it's very easily done. And if we had more than 5 hours tonight, I could go on ad nauseum with all the things that I'm aware of. I want to thank somebody right here, Barefoot C. Oh, I know where he's from. Barefoot C and several others have been posting German bombers, and now Barefoot C has finally come up with a photo of a bomber that's got a fighter on top of it, and either the fighter launches the bomber or the bomber launches the fighter, and it really doesn't matter which one, but you can read about it right here. And I'm guessing probably the fighter is the aircraft that survives and turns back to Germany. That's just a guess, but you know, I don't know everything, but I know a little bit about a whole lot of things. And yes, TWA was the one off Long Island in 1996 roughly, and it had some enemies of Bill and Hillary Clinton on board. David, over to you.
Right. Okay, thank you, Bill. So back to the schematic. So let's say the Bank of England, and of course it's not the Bank of England as such, it's a few treasonous individuals within the Bank of England or associated with the Bank of England. On the morning of 9/11, they're asking the question, where is Chick Burlingham and where is Field McConnell? You have this facility that I think was a submarine patent that was applied for but not published in operation. So this system goes out and looks for the various portable devices to find out where Captain Chick Burlingham last made a financial transaction. So it might be the morning of at an airport where he got onto that aircraft and he got some money because he needed some money at the other end of his journey for whatever. I don't know whether he had a personal operating system, a BlackBerry or something like that. It's more or less irrelevant. But very quickly, I think the Bank of England insiders would have known where Captain Chick Burlingham was as he checked through the various facilities onto the aircraft. Once he was in the aircraft, of course, I presume there's a method, an electronic method of identifying that you're in the aircraft. And what is it, that acronym for, is it OFF? No, that's not right. There's an acronym for pushing out of the gate, off the runway, on the runway.
No, let me help you. What you need to do is you need to take advantage of everyone here, including me. Out, off, on, in.
OOI.
Yeah, and what that means is the out time is when you release the brakes, whether the aircraft moves or not. A lot of times, if you're in an airliner and you're in sync with the sounds of an airliner, you can hear the parking brake being released 2, 3, 4, 10 minutes before the aircraft actually moves. That's because the pilots are trying to get paid more. When they release the brakes, they start getting paid. So it's very common to release the brakes early. It's also very dishonest, but then the airlines themselves are dishonest, aren't they? Then off is when the weight is removed from the wheels. There's a touchdown sensor on one of the main struts, maybe both of them, so that when the aircraft is no longer on the ground, it sends a signal through ACARS to let the dispatch and the company and everyone else know that the aircraft is airborne. Then when it lands at Diego Garcia, it sends another signal for on, because the touchdown relay or the squat switch is energized, and so it tells the world that the aircraft is on the ground. And then when the parking brake is set after the engines have been shut down. So you got to get the engine shut down, then set the parking brake, then that sends the signal for in. So it's out, off, on, in. OOI.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.
So now, the Bank of England insiders have asked a question, where the hell is Captain Chick Burlingham? Because we want to set him up as a patsy for this attack. And then there's another person I think they would have wanted to know where she was. and her name is Pamela Drew, and Pamela Drew was the Associate Professor of Computer Science at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology from 92 to 96. And then she came back to the United States and she got a gig with Boeing Phantom Works, which I think is a very nice name for an organization that would be able to provide very sophisticated technical service for 911 associated with the skyjacking of various aircraft and combining them and flying them into certain destinations and synchronizing that with drone maneuvers to take out, for example, a high-value target such as the Pentagon. So I've been thinking, where would Dr. Pamela Drew have decided to set up her war room for the 911 attack? And I think the most convincing place for me, Field, I don't know whether you would argue with that, would be the new Boeing headquarters at 100 North Wacker Drive in Chicago. Over to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm dealing with somebody who thinks they're banned from the chat room, which I don't think they are. So my focus was on trying to find out if Linda H. is banned. So I'm sending the message I got to Denise and Jameskin. But for other people out there, don't send me messages asking if you're banned. I very seldom look at email during a radio show. I was just going to Google something. So David, ask me your question in 30 seconds or less and I'll give you a 20-minute answer.
Okay, would it be plausible for Dr. Pamela Drew to set up a war room for the 911 attack when she was working with Boeing Phantom Works in the Boeing headquarters just commissioned at 100 North Wacker Drive, Chicago? Over to you.
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible, and it's just like this woman from BAE who sent me a stupid question today. She said something about, tell me all the airliners that have BUAPs in them, and my question, unfortunately, somebody with better judgment than me intervened and said, we can respond to that lady tomorrow, but don't lower yourself to talking to her now, because she obviously doesn't know her ass from third base. But the woman that contacted me today about the Boeings, it's not for me to prove that they're installed. Boeing already proved that with their statement on the 3rd of March of 2007, so it's up to BAE to prove to me that they've been removed. Now, one of our other agents who's down in Florida and is an artist, he suggested that I should go, and I take this under advisement. He suggested, because of her strong language, saying that she thinks that these BUAPs don't exist, I should interpret that and come up with an affidavit that, according to an update from BAE, I can now say it is my belief that all the Boeing uninterruptible autopilots have been removed. And what the person in Florida suggested is, if I were to come up with that affidavit and quote BAE as saying that they don't have those autopilots in any airliners, then the next time one of them goes down consistent with the BUAP, then that party that contacted me thinks that a class action suit could be brought. But I don't like doing anything with the Department of Justice because they're all a bunch of liars. David, over to you.
Right, so I think we can confidently say a logical spot for Dr. Pamela Drew to set up a war room for the 911 attack would be a Boeing Phantom Works operation in the Boeing headquarters in Chicago at 100 North Wacker Drive, which was just being commissioned. Actually, for all I know, it could have been commissioned on the morning of 911, the intent being to so intimidate the directors of Boeing and the staff, and also the legal implications or liabilities if the modified Boeing aircraft for the with a Boeing uninterruptible autopilot were to have been used during the exercises of 911 and they were switched from simulation to rogue, in which case Boeing would have a huge liability and it would be extremely difficult to duck out of, because let's say the Bank of England and its minions had put $50 million in the Boeing bank account in Chicago in order to buy the license or the right to use the uninterruptible autopilot through 911. So back to the schematic. So down the bottom on the left, there's a cloud which is described as third-party check-in. And just to name some of the entities that could allow a third party to check into the attacks of 911, we've got, now, of course, some of these have not been officially incorporated. What I'm basically saying is through submarine patents, they could still be operating as entities that would subsequently be given one or more of these names. Facebook Places, Foursquare, Google Latitude, Goala, whatever that is, Tripped, Salesforce Chatter, Yahoo Fire Eagle. Now, Mr. Trump, I'd like you to listen to this, Twitter. So at some time, the Twitter technologies was set up, probably patented, and then ultimately published, and a corporation was formed that would allow people like Donald Trump to be invited to come a third party to the events of 911. And what I'm basically saying, Field, is just like you can locate, or could have located, Captain Chick Burlingham, and you could have located Dr. Pamela Drew, you could have located a number of people in the media who you would like to invite to come in and spin the events of 911. And they may have been told, well, we'd like you to take this script and spin it, which is, you know, the Osama bin Laden Al-Qaeda script. And if you don't, we're going to expose pictures of you doing something disgusting to a young child. Or we'd like to put $500,000 in your bank account if you provide a convincing recounting of the script for 911 that it was Al-Qaeda or the Bin Laden group. So this is a really dangerous opportunity that's based purely in the technology, where you can locate a target or a patsy and frame them, and then locate the third-party media people who you need to present a convincing story to the American people that they've been attacked by a group or a guy with a long beard straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan, which was manifestly not true. So we got a very nice schematic, which I think maps on, as I said, to the Federal Bridge Certification Authority. And I did teach you about personalizing and polarizing, right?
Yes. You know, I have a 1937 Studebaker that once drove by the front door of Saul Alinsky's office in Chicago, where he advised, from a legal standpoint, Al Capone. And did you know that in February of 2004, speaking of polarizing and personalizing, do you know that on the 4th of February of this year, 2018, Hillary Clinton ordered diplomats not to talk about Novichok? David, did you know that before I just said it?
No, I didn't.
I just posted it in the chat room. So when some of these smart people that have a little bit of extra time can hit that, my link said Hillary ordered diplomats under what authority? First of all, Hillary's a has-been that looks like a milk horse that needs to be shot to put out of her misery as she limps around. But I don't think she has any authority. I think she's a has-been, and I don't see how she could influence diplomats or government officials in talking about or not talking about Novichok. But what's the first thing that crosses your mind when you consider Hillary and Novichok, David?
Her knowledge of intellectual property patents and access to the Mendenhall baby's image base.
Well, I was thinking of Chicago and Northwestern.
Yeah. No, she grew up in Chicago, right?
Yep, and she's her father was a mafia bum, and her father came into power after that February shootout, the Valentine's Day massacre, where Bugs Moran, I think, and Al Capone had a little tiff. Now, he didn't, meaning Hugh Rodham, didn't come into power that day, but he came into power at some point, and he was a mafia slimeball, and that makes Hillary the alleged offspring of a mafia slimeball, and I don't think that she has any authority. And so why would a diplomat or a U.S. government official let her tell them not to ask about Novichok? I think the answer is quite clear. It's because Novichok leads right back to Chicago, Northwestern University, Henry no, not Henry, what's his name, Minow, M-I-N-O-W, and then it skips over to Princeton, and Princeton is where the FBI director, who is a member of SES, and I'm talking about Robert Mueller, if I'm not mistaken, and if I am, I want to be corrected immediately, but would somebody just Google Robert Mueller, I think you'll find he was educated at Princeton. So was that guy that Barry Soetoro married, the guy with the big shoulders and the kickstand. That person went to Princeton, obviously, because, do you remember what Minow's first name was? It starts with an H, I think, M-I-N-O-W, from Chicago.
Henry?
I don't know, somebody in the chat room will tell us. But yeah, somebody in Chicago got, what's that huge person that was married to Barry Soetoro? That person got a free ride at Princeton, even though he, she, or it never appreciated it. But Robert Mueller went to Princeton, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, and by the way, somebody just proved me to be right. Somebody just put up, Braveheart put up the massacre of 7 of the Moran gang, M-O-R-A-N. That's Bugs Moran. Yeah, that was an entree to get other fresh blood into the mafia in Chicago turf wars, and Hugh Rodham is one of those people. But back to what I was saying about Hillary. Hillary probably protests too much. David, I taught you about advanced antique languages, and I've taught you about ancient Greek and ancient Hebrew. But did I ever teach you about the quote from 18th century literature where it says, "Methinks thou doth protest too much"?
Wouldn't that be 16th century with Shakespeare, Phil?
I was just checking to make sure you were listening. Yes, you're absolutely right. Do you know where Shakespeare is from, by the way?
Stratford-on-Avon.
Yeah, guess where Denise and I were about 7 days and 10 hours ago.
Did you visit St. Anne Hathaway's cottage?
No, we were on a diversion, the M40, I think it was. Was that the M40, Denise, or the M40? You remember? The one week?
M40.
Yeah, we were on the M40, and we had to go on a merry little trip through England, which was a giant pain in the arse, as you guys would say. But we saw somewhere up there between North Wales and Surrey, we got fairly close to Stratford-upon-Avon. But anyway, you tell me, David, why in the world would anybody think that Hillary has the authority to tell them not to mention Novichok? I can guarantee you that the reason she did that is she's trying to protect Minow, and nobody's come up with his first name yet, so I will. But M-I-N-O-W is a sleaze maggot from Chicago who does business with people like Barry Soetoro, Mike Obama, and the Clinton Party of 3. Over to you, David.
Yeah, now, that's interesting you mentioned Princeton. That's New Jersey, I think, because the Russian chemist who developed or was closely associated with the development of the nerve agents that were called in Russian parlance Foliant. So that program or that product was Foliant, and there's a variety of derivatives of that. But as the Russians point out, they never use the term Novichok, which means newcomer. That actually was first introduced by the guy who left Russia and went to Princeton, or is closely associated with Princeton University, and his name is like Marvinsky or whatever it was, and he wrote a book, and he's the guy who said, oh, only the Russians could have produced this. But you know what, that's not quite right, Phil, because the formula for producing Novichok is published, and the Americans, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, supervised the destruction of the stocks of the nerve agents in Russia. Well, I don't know about supervising, they certainly sent observers. And of course, they would have come back with samples of that product because you could never be sure that all of the stocks were destroyed. And the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is totally controlled by the Senior Executive Service. In fact, did you know, Phil, that the officers of the Senior Executive Service inside the Defense Threat Reduction Agency they're all flying the Keystone flag. Did you know that? Over to you.
Okay, I'm almost with you. By the way, the guy's name is Newton Minnow. I don't know if anybody beat me to it, but I just posted it. Yeah, Ginger Cookie says it's Newton Minnow, so that's a tie between, actually she beat me. But what was the question again about the SES?
The guy in Princeton wrote a book about the development of chemical agents in the Russian program, and apparently those agents in the Russia program were called foliant, or derivatives thereof, and he, that is this guy who's now living in the United States, he introduced the term Novichok in his book, and that is the book that describes the newcomer on the block. Now, my argument would be that when the Defense Threat Reduction Agency went over there to supervise or witness the destruction of the Russian stocks, they would have brought back samples, and then as part of a contract with Northwestern University, they paid for or partially funded a detoxification system that has now been patented. And when I Googled for Novichok and detoxification and Northwestern University, lo and behold, they've actually been working and had a patent granted for getting rid of this stuff. So it's very obvious that they would have had to have stocks of it to prove that they could get rid of it. Northwestern University, as you know, Field, was a place where there was a very illustrious lecturer for the Students for a Democratic Society and the New World Order by the name of Bernadine Dawn, and she used to lecture, and probably still does, because that must turn her crank, used to lecture to young people at Northwestern University on torture paradigms and practice. So there's a whole series of events that connect Bernadine Dawn, Michelle Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton to torture and to the use of the Novichok chemicals, or Novichok equivalent chemicals, in Salisbury, which I think is just down the road from Porton Down, isn't it? Over to you.
Salisbury and Porton Down. I don't know. Let me defer to my British wife. Do you know if Salisbury is near Porton Down? Yes, I've got a yes from her, but I can also reach out to Gobsmack, who would know. And there's other people. Bob Hutchings, who's from Camberley, he's in the chat room. Pardon me? Oh, okay. Denise was yawning. I told you, David, that it's really hard for ladies to stay awake, alert when you're around, but that's okay, because Denise and I both have trouble sleeping, so if we could go on for another 2 hours, I'm sure we'd pass out here and hit her floor. But what was your question? Oh, yeah, Salisbury and Porton Down. Yes, they're very close by, and I think that, and I know that you and I probably have different opinions about the merkin from Maidenhead. By the way, David, you know which politician in the United Kingdom is from Maidenhead?
No, Phil.
Theresa May. Now, do you know what a merkin is?
Yes, I do.
Very good. You must have learned it from me, correct?
Yes.
Good. I'm going to see how long it takes for this to catch. I refer to Theresa May as the merkin from Maidenhead. And I think she is totally irrelevant now. She's full of bluster. She wants to, I think she wants somebody to start World War III so that she is not held to account for Grenfell, the pedophile issue, and the pedophile issue runs to the very top of the UK government. And, I cannot understand the evil nature of these politicians, that they'd like to start a world war to cover their tracks. Listen, Theresa May, her tracks lead right to Maidenhead. Whoever the boneheads in the United Kingdom government that put her in charge, she couldn't be a less inspiring person. And, because you're a person first and a politician after you get brainwashed, I don't know if there's a less... In fact, I'm asking you, David, can you think of a less inspiring politician right now on the global front, say the front 20 countries? Is there anybody that you can think of that's less inspirational than her?
Yeah, Phil, no, but I don't think that she's been selected for her ability to inspire people. It's she's been selected for her ability to frighten people, because going back to this pattern, the requesting organisation is the Bank of England, right?
Yep.
And I've just put in the chat room that Theresa May had a key role in the Bank of England. After graduating with a degree in geography from Oxford, May went to work in the city, initially starting work at the Bank of England and later rising to become head of the European Affairs Unit of the Association for Payment Clearing Service. What that means is, Phil, Theresa May would have been in a position to point significant sums at the various people who were going to be participating in the script, spot, shoot, snuff, spin and spoil phases of the 911 attack. And she would have also been able to point the money at the people who were needed to whack whistleblowers. And obviously, and I think you've told me, had Captain Chick Burlingham lived, he would have been a very important whistleblower in the conspiracy, because he would have pointed out, if I understand you correctly, his role in various war games involving simulated aircraft flying into buildings on 911. Is that correct? Over to you.
Yeah, he was a war gamer, and I'm going to give you a name that nobody will ever hear unless they hear it from me. Now, that seems pretty pompous, doesn't it? Doesn't that seem a little bit egotistical, honestly, David?
No, it doesn't matter, Phil.
Oh, you're right, it doesn't. Let's leave is it we leave our ego at the door, or we leave our hubris at the door?
Well, if my hubris was at the same door as your ego, I think I'd know who's going to come in first.
Well, don't keep me in suspense.
Well, my hubris.
Well, okay, what is a hubris? Is that some type of vegetable?
It's the flip side of your ego.
Oh, so hubris is humility?
No, hubris is pride, and ego is they're metaphors, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, I had a lecture today by a very intelligent man whose first name is James and his last name is, in fact, I don't think he's here. He's often in our chat room, but the gentleman in question, no, he's not here right now, which means he's at a dinner party in Tel Aviv. No kidding. Very intelligent, very knowledgeable, very nice person, and a real contributor to Abel Danger. He's only been with Abel Danger for probably 6 months, but he's really smart, and he would, hubris is anyway, whatever. I don't need to know what hubris is, but wait a minute, do I have it or don't I have it, David?
We've all got a bit of it. Well, I don't have a bit of your hubris, but we all have hubris, we all have egos, we all have pride. In many cases, it's justifiable because we do what we do and we do it the best we can. So I don't have a problem. All I say is that you've got to leave those kind of things at the door if you're investigating a crime. And actually, in many cases, and I think it's worth saying again, preconceptions about guilt or innocence. The first obligation, I think, of Abel Danger is to identify the weapon. And this schematic is actually vitally important to the conspiracy associated with the 911 attack, because it had multiple roles in the script, spin, spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil, but particularly of tracking the victims, and the patsies and the whistleblowers and the crisis actors needed to come together in a synchronized way, and I'll address that in a minute, to convey to the public that this was an external attack, when in fact it was a domestic attack. Over to you, Phil.
Yes, and the name that I was going to mention that nobody's ever heard of before unless they heard it from me, and it's totally insignificant, but see, this really creates mental problems for the bad guys, because when I mention the name Paul Knox, K-N-O-X, and they have no idea who Paul Knox is or what his relationship was to both me and Chick Burlingame. Now, just for the people that are sort of new to Abel Danger, Chick Burlingame was an American Airlines captain whose part-time job was being a Navy captain at the Pentagon, where he was a war gamer, and I believe he was the author of Amalgam Virgo 01, which was the exercise that was practiced one time and one time only on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001. And the next time they dusted off the plan for Amalgam Virgo 01 It was an exercise that went live when the Canadians, acting as patsies of the UK, the Canadians made this exercise go rogue, and they actually attacked the United States. And they attacked it with 4 airliner drones, drones of United 175 and United 93 and American 11 and 77. 3 of the real aircraft, and that would be all 3 of the real airliners with the exception of United 93, which was blown apart over Shanksville because it was too late to strike the U.S. Capitol. The other 3 real airliners with real crews and real passengers went out to Whiskey 386 Alpha airspace and were destroyed. That's premeditated murder. But the people that ran the exercise and the attack of 9/11, and those people include Hillary, my sister, George H.W. Bush, John McCain, and a bunch of other wimps, these people thought they had cleaned up the people that would recognize their own devices in 9/11. For instance, Willie Card was a black American who was in charge of the private ATC system, and they killed him. Dr. Hale, H-A-L-E, I think that's his name, at MIT or Harvard, maybe it was Harvard, he taught strange languages, including Navajo. And because on the morning of 9/11, the languages used in the attack by the hostile parties, meaning the people that were intending to do damage to America, they were going to speak English, French, Arabic, and Navajo. Now, there's not a whole lot of people who are fluent in Navajo, so once the word got out that Navajo was part of 9/11 planning, then this Dr. Hale, and I hope somebody will tell me where he was. I think it's at Harvard now that I think about it. But Dr. Hale was killed, Chick Burlingame was killed, Willie Card was killed. Maybe there's somebody that you know, David, that they should have killed, but they didn't yet. And so in the meantime, the party goes on, and these people like BAE, when they, without doing much thinking, they shoot their mouth off and talk about the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. I'd like to hear what BAE corporate, like the CEO, and so maybe somebody can find the, and I can find it later, so don't anybody feel like you have to look for it, but if I could get the public affairs representative of BAE or the CEO, I would like to send them the comment by their engineer who tells me that the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot doesn't exist, even though Boeing told everybody in London 11 years ago it does exist. Apparently this engineer lady really doesn't know too much, or maybe she doesn't study history. Maybe she's someone like Alan Dransfield's always talking about how corrupt and inept these mid-level managers are. Maybe she's just one more out of that moldy bag. David, over to you.
Right, Phil. So I just it's in the post that went out yesterday, and I've been a little naughty. I've put XXX for the individual who I believe was behind the use of this patented technology. I'll read it, and then maybe we can guess at who XXX is. So the outfit is MYSIS, MYSIS, International Banking Systems Limited in London, and the system is described as system and method for leveraging location to enhance banking services, US 9875478. Allegedly used as a submarine patent by XXX to track payments to Marcy's Con Air SWAT teams and Al-Qaeda or Russian crisis actors for the Anthrax and Novichok attacks, and to warn patsers and crisis actors via social networking websites or via manual and or automated check-in on such websites of what happens to prospective whistleblowers. So, as I said, Field, I think this patent is extraordinarily in scope because it allows you to track potential victims, attract members of the hit team, and instantly provoke a media campaign, or I think technically Serco calls it a media play or a series of news injects to alert the public with a decoy or a limited hangout to go and chase innocent patsies, such as Osama bin Laden, and decoy you away from the real perpetrators. So Field, little challenge, and then I think we're getting close to the end. Who do you think XXX is? Who used this technology as a submarine patent to track payments to your sister's Con Air SWAT teams on 911? Over to you.
Well, you have 3 X's. Is it a 5-letter word or a 3-letter word?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a 6-letter word.
Uh-oh. Well, then I don't know. Over to you.
The name is Rupert Soames.
Oh, you meant a human. I thought you meant a corporation. Go ahead and rephrase it like it's a human.
Okay. Who was behind the use of the submarine patent, who tracked or would have tracked payments to Marcy's, your sister's Con Air SWAT teams, and Al-Qaeda or Russian crisis actors for the Anthrax and Novichok attacks? Over to you.
Well, it's quite obvious it has to be Rupert Soames, because he was in the United States in 76 and 78 practicing his sumo wrestling with my sister, Kristine Marcy, that resulted in a Mendenhall baby. And also one of those Soames guys was at the Ministry of Defense in 94 to 97 when they moved the ATC of Malaysia to be a mirror of the British ATC. And so Serco is now the biggest ATC, air traffic controller, in the world. And I think that the lady from British Aerospace, BAE, and then their subcorporation of Tracor, I think by sundown tomorrow she's going to really regret that she left a comment on Abel Danger about how little we know, because the truth is that Abel Danger, I mean, just look at our chat room log today. Look at all the information that comes out from people in our chat room. It appears that a few of us know a lot more about her comment than she does. And I can't believe that British Aerospace is going to be happy with that wench. Over to you.
No, and so we've got this very nice connection between Willie Card, who would have been murdered by Serco. He was, as you point out, the black head honcho for the 58 or 65 FAA contract towers. Now, if we go back to earlier in the show, we've been talking about the flight intervention management system invented by Boeing in the 1980s. And again, I'm very confident that would have been a submarine patent that wasn't totally described, because what it would give to Boeing insiders, maybe proteges in the mentor-protege program launched by your sister and John Kerry, is the opportunity for proteges to jump into an air traffic control link with an aircraft and skyjack it and fly it into a target. So it's vitally important to understand that Rupert Soames spent 15 years with the avionics and electronic department or division of GEC, and that's separate from GEC in the United States. But at that level field, we can be very confident they were sharing patents. And so Nicholas Soames goes out to the United States in Washington in 1968. He works as a personal assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, who would go on to become the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And that's a very powerful position. My question would be, would this guy, Nicholas Soames, have been in the same room as your sister, Kristine Marcy, when she apparently conceived a Mendenhall's baby, at least according to the article written by Judy Mann, who's now dead. And Judy Mann turns out to be a woman celebrated by Planned Parenthood and the depopulation eccentrics of Margaret Sanger. So I would guess that she may have been married, but I think that's a bit like, your sister marrying Eric Marcy. I think these kind of marriages are set up with beards on both sides. I think Judy Mann would have been very interested in overthrowing what she would describe as a heteropatriarchal society, and was absolutely delighted. I think the interview was late in August of 1979, when she refers to your sister's daughter and your niece Jessica Marcy as a Mendenhall's baby. I would think there'd be a violently radical group of lesbians. In French, you'd call that les lesbiennes radicales, that had been plotting since at least 1978 or 79 to overthrow heteropatriarchal society represented by people like you, Field. Over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say he was a useless dweeb, but before, that could apply to so many of the people we've talked about tonight. But I'm responding now to Eager Beaver. He said, is Paul Knox a hockey player? And here's my answer. And David, you've heard this before, but you would have forgotten it because it's truly insignificant until I give you the rest of the story. But Paul Knox was Chick Burlingame's boss at the Pentagon. And the significance is, I was talking to Paul Knox face-to-face once about 9/11, and I told him about Chick Burlingame's death on 9/11, and he indicated to me that I didn't know what I was talking about because he was Chick Burlingame's boss. And you know me, I don't have much respect for dweebs. This guy was a one-star general in the North Dakota Air National Guard, but he was not an aviator. He was a paper pusher. And I told him, I said, someday you're going to eat those words because you are the guy who's got your head up your ass, and you have no idea what Chick Burlingame was involved in or why he's dead today. And I said, but don't overreact right now. I said, give it 10 or 15, 20 years. The truth will come out, and when the truth comes out, you can pretend like we didn't have this conversation, but if I ever see you again, I'll remind you. A lot of people that were in positions of limited authority on 9/11, they have no idea what they were involved in, and one such person is Paul Knox. Yes, he was vertically above Chick Burlingame, but he had no idea what happened to Chick Burlingame, and I would think that's your responsibility. If you're a general and you got a Navy captain that disappeared, I think you should try to understand what happened to him. David, are you still there?
Yes, I'm Phil.
Okay, it sounded like you faded. I'm glad you're not faded, because I'd sit here and talk to myself. But since you're here, why don't you say something? And whenever you want to call it quits, you won't have an argument from me. But I do think that, we are putting some good stuff down on the record, because this is the record, by the way. And I was given the contact, the chain of command, if you will, for Boeing Aerospace, and I'm pleased to report to you, David, that the CEO of, I said Boeing, British, I meant BAE. The CEO of BAE is a Cambridge scholar. Did you know that, David?
I think I did, actually.
Yeah, and after he got a degree there and a bunch of exotic stuff, he went over to Holland and got a degree, I think, from Eramus, ERAMUS University. So I wonder, I'll try to get a hold of him tomorrow, and I'll just send him the message that I got from one of his chief engineers, and I'll see what he thinks about that. Over to you, David.
Okay, so I put a little collage up. I think it was James in Israel who sent me this collage, and I'm very grateful for that for many reasons, what James is doing for us. But on the right-hand side, we have a picture of the founder, charter member of the Senior Executive Service, Kristine Marcy, your sister. In the middle, we have a picture of your niece, Jessica Marcy.
Yep.
And on the left, we have a picture of Nicholas Soames. And I've asked lots of people if they think Nicholas Soames could be the father of Jessica Marcy, in which case Jessica Marcy would be the great-granddaughter of Winston Churchill, which might be interesting for her. But if I look at the jowls and the eyebrow and the face, and you know what, she doesn't look very happy. And of course, well, I wouldn't be happy if I was the daughter of your sister, given the record that your sister has. But what do you think? Do you think the physiognomy suggests a DNA linkage, Field, with the Soames brothers? Over to you.
Well, I think you're about 3 minutes behind J.J. Johnson of, actually it's J.J. Jono of Jersey, who put up the exact same image, and I know that that image did come from James Long Hale. And yeah, first of all, I'm looking at my sister's picture. I'm about ready to vomit. I don't want to get vomit on Denise's keyboard. But because I'm familiar with Jessica, that's a horrible picture of Jessica, but I don't blame her for looking horrible, because she You know, the stuff we've been doing for 11 years, it's not like we're doing this in a little dark room in somebody's garage. We're doing it on the internet. And Jessica Marcy, bless her heart, she has to see all this stuff swirling around her mother, and she has to see it's either true or it's false. But Mom, if it's false, why aren't you suing your brother for libel? And you can't sue me for libel because it's not false. My sister is the second most evil person of whom I'm aware in the United States of America. The only person that I would say is more evil and more of an enemy of God than my sister is George H.W. Bush. And if anybody thinks I'm afraid to say that in public, they don't know me. There's a great song by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes from Philadelphia, If You Don't Know Me By Now. In fact, let me just give you the next line. If you don't know me by now, you'll never, ever, ever know me. Anyway, I'd like someone to play that at my funeral. I think it would be a great laugh. You know, if you don't know me by now, well, of course you're not going to know me because I'm gone. David, over to you.
Yeah, right, Phil. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground, so it's a very fruitful, this approach, and I hope I can share and encourage people to look at crime scenes where certainly like a major RICO event in terms of are there indications. I often say there's 3 out of 6 is enough reason to start in this method. For script, spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil. So if you can see that some of these events have been scripted, and the classic example would be 911, where it was scripted with Amalgam Virgo on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, where planes were hijacked and the target was the Capitol building. So there was a script that had been written. Obviously, General Alexander Haig had studied that script, and he was presumably hired to demonstrate how easy it was to cut through the defenses of the United States if the command chain had been hacked and the various good people in the United States had been told to stand down. And of course your sister had a private airline called Con Air to fly the scumbags into the crime scenes. And there we have, I think, the manifestation. Is it the fruits of the loom? You've got a Mendenhall baby right in the middle, looking very unhappy because I think she's trapped in this ship. But maybe we can help her get out of it. Over to you, Phil.
Well, maybe we can get a paternity suit against Fat Boy, and she could, you know, get half of his gin supply or something.
Absolutely, she could be very wealthy, and I think it's not her fault that she was born into this family. You're an innocent, actually, to a fairly advanced age, maybe a few years. You look at little Barack Hussein Obama, Barry Spatero, 7 years old in Jakarta. He's got a communist mother who gives him a cross-dressing male prostitute as a nanny. So who knows how you would turn out, Phil? Over to you.
Well, I have to say that my dealings with Jessica have always been cordial, and regardless of what her lifestyle may or may not be, and I'm not 100% certain, although I'm 93% certain, that doesn't matter. She's always been kind to me, and she's been gracious to me, whereas her mother and her sister have always been belligerent bovines, and, you know, they try to push me around. I used to have cattle, and I'm here to tell you that medium frame cattle like Angus, they can push a human around real good, a female. And if you're fiddling with the female cow's newborn calf, you can be dead real quick. And so I have great regard for bovines, and I think that if the Texas Ranch happens, we will either have Irish moiled cattle or British white cattle or both down there in Texas. And by the way, just to keep people up to date on the ranch, yesterday I was in communications several times with a lady in North Carolina who is one of the few remaining principals of a group that has several, maybe as many as 6 or 8 World War II aircraft, and probably 6 to 8 to 10 World War II vehicles. And if you've heard the term marriage made in heaven, the organization in North Carolina had made many trips to Texas looking for a place to move their aircraft and their vehicle artifacts because I believe they wanted to get out of the moist and hot and humid southeast, and they wanted to go to a drier location. I don't know that. The lady didn't tell me that. She is an Abel Dangerette, whose agent name is M-A-R-C, Mark, M-A-R-C, not Marcy, M-A-R-C-Y. But if the ranch occurs, and I'm hopeful that it will, I've been hopeful for a number of years, but it looks like we might be able to provide a place for those World War II artifacts, including two L-4, which are Piper Cub aircraft, and a UC-78. There's one for Braveheart to look up. Braveheart, trust me, this is worth looking up. Look up a UC, Uniform Charlie 78. The pilots in World War II call it the Bamboo Bomber. Some people called it a Cessna Bobcat. And for people that were watching TV in 1953, 54, 55, the original Sky King airplane was a Cessna Bobcat. So anyway, if the ranch happens, and I'm hoping it will, I've been told it will, I believe it will. Of course, the country we're living in and the country I'm sitting in, I'm in the UK and I live about 50% of the time in the US. Both of these countries lie to their people. But I think the Maidenhead Merkin has now been exposed. I think the problems in the United States in terms of leadership left with the last administration. And we just need to have confidence and faith and patience that Trump will in fact identify those working against him. And by the way, I think he just got rid of his, yes he did, David. Did you know that Trump just got rid of the doctor that was his private doctor? Because that guy is going to the VA. Did you know that, David?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well, Rex Tillerson was a camel in the tent. The doctor was a camel in the tent. It's my opinion, and my opinion may be shared by others or may not be, but I believe Wilbur Ross is a camel in the tent. And little by little, Trump is telling the camels to go find greener pastures. And I'm going to stay on